The first-class cabin held its breath. Michael Reynolds sat in seat 2A with his back against the leather, shoulders square, hands visible. The window beside him was still gray with morning, and the air smelled like brewed coffee and chemical lemon cleaner. A low engine hum vibrated through the floor and up his shins, steady as a warning. Sarah Collins stood in the aisle like a barricade. Her arms were crossed tight, her posture angled toward him, blocking the clean line of the cabin. Her voice had already traveled farther than it needed to, sharp enough to cut through the soft chatter of boarding. "Sir, he does not have a valid first-class ticket and he is creating a disturbance for the other guests." Michael did not move. He kept his eyes on her face, not her uniform, not the stairs behind her. The paper boarding pass lay flat in his lap like a quiet shield, the inked seat assignment clear. 2A, first class. His name. A few rows ahead, a businessman in seat 1A paused his scrolling and looked up. Across the aisle, a woman leaned slightly into the aisle, phone half raised as if she was deciding whether this moment deserved to be saved. In the back of first class, someone shifted, and the leather sighed. Sarah turned her head toward the front, speaking past Michael instead of to him, performing the story she wanted everyone to believe. Michael heard the lie settle into the cabin, heard it land with the weight of official truth simply because she said it like she owned it. Michael's jaw tightened, then relaxed. He inhaled slowly through his nose, recycled air, faint cologne, the metallic note of the ventilation. He had boarded early for a reason. He wanted quiet. He wanted to work without eyes over his shoulder. He wanted an uneventful 3 hours. He had learned a long time ago that wanting something did not mean the world would allow it. "Sir, stand up for me, please. If you do not, you are going to be removed from the aircraft." The voice did not come from Sarah. It came from a man beside her, taller, broader, dressed in the dull authority of airport security. Officer Jake Morrison had stepped into the first-class aisle with his hand near his belt, a practiced stance that said he was ready to make this physical before anyone had proven it needed to be. The cabin quieted further. Conversations faded into the background like lights dimming. Someone's seatbelt clasp clicked. A small sound. Too loud. Michael looked up at Morrison, then back at Sarah. Sarah's eyes were fixed on him with a certainty that did not match reality. Her mouth was set, the corners tight, as if she had already decided how this ended. "I am in the seat printed on my ticket. It is right here." He tapped the boarding pass once with 2 fingers, calm and deliberate. The paper barely moved. He kept his tone controlled, not pleading, not angry, measured, clean. Sarah's expression did not change. She acted as if she had not heard him. She leaned slightly toward Morrison and made sure the cabin heard her. "Tickets legitimate. Last chance, sir." The words were wrong, but the confidence behind them was the danger. Michael felt it in the way Morrison shifted his weight forward, in the way Sarah's shoulders squared as if she wanted the confrontation to become proof of her accusation. Michael's eyes flicked to the passengers. The businessman in 1A was watching now, phone down, attention fully on this. The woman across the aisle lifted her phone higher, the glow of the screen reflected in her glasses. Another passenger further back raised a phone too, then another. Small rectangles of light, steady hands, silent witnesses. Michael felt the familiar tightening in his chest, not fear, not exactly, but the cold recognition of a pattern. He had paid to be here. He had done nothing. None of that mattered to the people who had already decided he did not belong. Morrison held out his hand, palm up, impatient. "Show me the boarding pass." Michael did not snatch it or fling it. He lifted it and handed it over. The paper brushed Morrison's fingers. Morrison glanced at it quickly like he was checking a box, not looking for truth. Everything on the boarding pass was clean. His name, the flight number, seat 2A, first class, the barcode, the time. Morrison handed it back with a dismissive flick, as if returning something worthless. "That does not mean you get to argue with crew." "I am not arguing," Michael said. "I am sitting in my assigned seat." Morrison's eyes narrowed. His gaze moved over Michael's clothes, his hands, the laptop bag at his feet, then back to Michael's face. The look was not curiosity. It was accusation in a uniform. Sarah's voice slid in again, quick and confident. "He has been disruptive. He is refusing to follow instructions." Michael turned his head slightly, letting the cabin see his face as he spoke. "That is not true. I have been sitting quietly since I boarded. Ask anyone here. The businessman in one, a straightened, anger flashing across his features. He has done nothing wrong, he said. I have been sitting right here. Another voice came from behind, firm, female. He showed you his ticket. Leave him alone. Sarah snapped her head toward the voice, eyes hard. This does not concern you. It concerns all of us, the woman shot back. Morrison raised his hand toward the cabin, palm out, a gesture meant to silence. I am not asking passengers. The woman across the aisle lifted her phone slightly higher, the camera lens aimed directly at the aisle. I have video of everything, she said. He has not done anything wrong. Morrison's head turned. His stare pinned her. Put the phone down or you will be next. The cabin went colder. Michael felt a sharp edge of disbelief. The threat was not just against him now, it was against the record, against the evidence forming in real time. He looked at Morrison, voice steady but lower, sharper. You are threatening passengers for recording. Morrison stepped closer. The aisle narrowed. Leather seats pressed in on both sides, making the space feel like a corridor in a courthouse. Decisions made, Morrison said. Stand up now. Michael did not stand. He stayed seated with his back straight, knees planted, feet flat. He could feel the eyes on him, the tiny movements of people holding still so their cameras would not shake. The airplane door was still open. The jet bridge was still attached. Morning air drifted in faintly, cool and distant, like another world. Sarah stood slightly behind Morrison, arms still crossed, face flushed with vindication. She looked as if she expected applause. Michael kept his hands where they could be seen, not because he had to prove he was harmless, but because he understood how quickly a lie could turn into force. He understood how quickly a body could become a problem to be solved. Morrison's voice hardened, louder, so the whole cabin heard him. Last chance, sir. The words hung in the air like a dropped object that did not land. Michael's gaze moved from Morrison to Sarah, then past them to the front of the cabin. He saw the businessman's tight expression. He saw the woman's phone unwavering. He saw another passenger's mouth pressed into a line of disgust. He tasted metal behind his teeth. He did not move. In the quiet, the engine hum seemed louder. The overhead light above his seat buzzed faintly. Somewhere, a bag wheel clicked against the floor. Morrison's hand shifted closer to his belt. The cabin stayed silent. The cameras did not. The moment stretched until it felt unreal, like the cabin itself was waiting to see which version of truth would win. Michael kept his gaze steady on Morrison's face, watching the tiny tells, the slight flare of nostrils, the impatience disguised as authority. Morrison wanted compliance, not clarity. Behind him, Sarah stood rigid, chin lifted, eyes bright with the kind of certainty that never bothered to check facts. The phones stayed up. Their screens glowed in the dim cabin light, small and relentless. Michael could hear faint taps as someone adjusted focus, the soft scrape of a finger over glass. Evidence being shaped in real time. He breathed in through his nose. Coffee. Jet fuel leaking in from the open door. A hint of someone's citrus cologne. His pulse stayed slow, controlled, the way it had learned to be when people confused volume for power. Morrison's hand hovered near his belt, an unspoken promise. Michael didn't give him anything to feed on. No sudden movements, no raised voice, no spectacle. The boarding pass lay flat again in Michael's lap, edges squared. He looked down at it for a half second, then back up. The simplest facts were still the most dangerous. Seat 2A, his name, paid ticket. And still, Sarah had decided it was a problem. She stepped half a pace forward and angled her body so she could address the cabin while pretending she was addressing him. Her tone sharpened, the words crisp, as if she was reading from an invisible script. Sir, you are creating a disturbance for other guests. Michael's jaw tightened, then released. He didn't answer the lie directly. He answered the reality. I am seated. I have not touched anyone. I have not raised my voice. Morrison cut in, dismissive. Crew says you're a problem. That's enough. The businessman in 1A made a small sound under his breath, something between disbelief and disgust. Across the aisle, the woman recording didn't lower her phone. If anything, she steadied it, elbows closer to her ribs like she was bracing for impact. Michael's eyes flicked down to his laptop bag at his feet. Black leather, scuffed at the corners. Heavy enough to remind him what was inside, heavy enough to be worth protecting. He nudged it subtly with the side of his shoe, pulling it a few inches closer under the seat in front of him, not hiding it, just anchoring it where it wouldn't get kicked or grabbed in the chaos. Morrison seemed eager to create. The zipper pull caught a sliver of cabin light and flashed. For a brief second, the edge of a credential wallet sat visible inside the mouth of the bag, then disappeared as the leather settled back into place. Morrison didn't notice. Sarah didn't notice. The people filming did. One of the phones shifted angle, tracking the movement toward the bag, then back to Morrison's hand near his belt. The story on those screens was turning into a sequence of choices, a timeline, a chain. Michael's stomach tightened with something that wasn't fear, exactly. More like the weight of consequence, pressing down on the quiet parts of his mind that had hoped today would be easy. His job lived on small mistakes, on seconds people ignored, on assumptions people never questioned. And right now, the assumption in front of him was the kind that could get someone hurt. Morrison leaned in, voice lower, meant only for Michael. Stand up, walk off, this ends clean. Michael held his gaze. It doesn't end clean, he said. It ends wrong. Sarah's face flushed, as if the word wrong was an insult directed at her. She pivoted to Morrison, quick, urgent. He's refusing instructions. Michael didn't look at her. He looked at the cabin, at the witnesses she was trying to erase. Ask them, he said. Morrison's head snapped toward the passengers like he might bark at them again. He lifted his hand, palm out, rehearsed authority. Nobody speak. This is not your... He stopped mid-sentence. Because the woman in 2C, still filming, didn't flinch. The time is on my screen, she said, voice steady. And you're threatening me? A beat of silence. Michael watched Morrison's expression shift, not into doubt, but into irritation. The idea that the moment could be documented annoyed him more than the idea that it might be wrong. Sarah saw it too and rushed to fill the space, to keep control before it slipped. Captain will back us, she said, too confident, too sure of the hierarchy. This is my cabin. Michael felt a cold line of clarity cut through him. That was the real stake, not the seat, not the ticket. The system that rewarded certainty over truth. He looked down again at the boarding pass, then at the aisle, then at the open door beyond first class, bright with morning. The gap between this cabin and the jet bridge felt like a trap, a short walk that could become a headline, a clip, a narrative he didn't get to write. He could already see the shape of it. Black man removed from first class. They would say disruptive. They would say refusal. They would say crew safety. They would say anything that made the removal seem inevitable and reasonable, anything that kept the burden of proof off their own bias. But the phones were up, and the phones didn't care about their excuses. Michael's throat tightened, not with emotion he couldn't control, but with restraint. He chose each word like it mattered. I want your names, he said to Morrison and Sarah. For the report. Sarah blinked. What report? Michael didn't answer her. He turned his eyes fully to Morrison. Your name, he said, and hers, and the captain's, when he gets here. Morrison's mouth twitched, the first sign of uncertainty. Not fear, not remorse, just the awareness that someone might write this down with more authority than a complaint card. Sarah recovered quickly and scoffed. You're not filing anything. You're leaving this aircraft. Michael didn't move. Outside, the jet bridge groaned softly as someone walked on it. A distant rolling suitcase clacked. Boarding continued somewhere behind the curtain of first class, life still moving as if this aisle wasn't a courtroom. Then, a new sound cut through the cabin. A sharp chime, the cockpit door latch, a hinge shifting, footsteps, measured, confident, coming forward. Sarah's shoulders squared like she'd been waiting for backup. Morrison straightened, a fraction taller, as if the presence of rank would sanitize everything that had just happened. Michael kept his eyes on the aisle entrance. A figure filled it. Silver hair, uniform pressed sharp, the look of someone accustomed to being obeyed. Captain Dennis Hart stepped into first class. And Michael felt the situation tighten again, not because the truth had changed, but because the power had. Captain Dennis Hart's presence changed the temperature of the cabin. He didn't rush. He didn't look uncertain. He moved down the aisle with the calm, practiced authority of a man who believed the uniform settled questions before they were asked. The overhead lights caught the silver in his hair and the hard shine of the insignia on his shoulders. Sarah shifted toward him immediately, like a magnet snapping to metal. "This passenger is refusing to cooperate with crew instructions," she said, voice controlled now, almost relieved. Morrison stood half a step behind her, posture squared, hand still hovering too close to his belt. He kept his eyes on Michael like he was watching for the smallest excuse. Hart's gaze landed on Michael for a brief second, then slid away to Sarah, then Morrison, as if the order of trust was already set. "Sir," Hart said, tone clipped and final, "if my crew member has asked you to deplane, you need to comply." The words dropped into the cabin like a verdict. Michael felt something cold settle behind his ribs, not panic, not anger. A clean, hard understanding. Hart had decided without checking the simplest fact in the room. Michael's boarding pass was still visible. The phones were still raised. Witnesses were still sitting right there. None of it mattered if the captain refused to see it. "On what grounds?" Michael asked. Hart's expression didn't shift. "Failure to comply with crew instructions is grounds for removal." "What instruction have I failed to comply with?" Michael said, voice steady, slightly sharper. "I showed my boarding pass. I answered questions. I have not violated policy." Sarah's jaw tightened. The flush in her cheeks returned. "He's been disruptive," she said quickly, "and he's arguing." Michael looked past her to the cabin, inviting the truth to breathe. "Ask anyone," he said. "He hasn't done anything," a woman called from farther back. Another voice followed. "She's lying." He's been sitting quietly. The businessman in 1A stood up, anger tightening his shoulders. "Captain," he said, "I've watched this whole thing. He did nothing wrong. Your attendant approached him differently than she approached white passengers. This is racial profiling." The woman filming across the aisle held her phone higher, the screen glow reflecting on her cheek. "I have it all on video," she said. "The ticket, the tone, everything." Hart turned his head slightly toward the cabin, irritation flickering for the first time. "Everyone needs to calm down. This is my aircraft, and I make the final decision about who stays and who goes." The phrase, "my aircraft," felt like a wall being built in real time. Michael watched Hart's eyes avoid the raised phones, avoid the boarding pass, avoid the discomfort in the cabin. He watched him cling to authority because authority was easier than admitting his crew might be wrong. Morrison stepped closer, using Hart's presence like permission. "Stand up now," he said, "or we do this the hard way." A few passengers inhaled at once. Leather creaked as people shifted, bracing. The cabin felt smaller, tighter, trapped between a lie and a uniform. Michael didn't move. He kept his hands visible, palms open. He could feel the gaze of every camera in the aisle. He could feel Sarah waiting for a reaction she could label as threatening. He chose not to give her one. Instead, he reached slowly toward the overhead bin above his seat. Morrison stiffened instantly, his hand snapping closer to his belt. "Don't," Morrison warned, voice sharper. Michael paused, fingers resting on the latch. He didn't jerk, he didn't rush. He looked at Morrison and held eye contact long enough to make the point clear. "I'm getting identification," Michael said. "That's all." Sarah's eyes narrowed, suspicion tightening her face again. "You don't need to." Michael opened the bin with a soft click. The lid lifted. Cool air rolled down from the compartment. He pulled his laptop bag out carefully, the black leather heavy in his hand, and set it on his lap with deliberate control. The cabin lights caught the bag's worn edges. A zipper pull glinted as his fingers found it. Phones tilted slightly to follow. Michael slid the zipper open. The sound was small, but in the silence it carried, metal teeth separating, a private sound becoming public. Inside, a credential wallet sat near the top, flat and black, familiar as a heartbeat. Michael took it out with 2 fingers, held it for a beat, then opened it. He raised it so the captain, the officer, the flight attendant, and every camera could see. A badge flashed under the cabin lights. Gold, official, unmistakable. Michael's voice didn't rise. It became colder. "Special Agent Michael Reynolds, FBI," he said. "Counterterrorism Division." For 3 seconds, the cabin stopped making sound. Sarah's face drained so fast it looked like someone had turned down the saturation. Her mouth opened slightly, but no words came. Her crossed arms loosened, hands hovering as if she wasn't sure what to do with them anymore. Morrison's hand fell away from his belt like it had been burned. He took a small step back without meaning to, his earlier aggression collapsing into visible uncertainty. Captain Hart froze. The authority in his posture faltered, replaced by something close to fear. His eyes fixed on the badge and didn't blink. Michael kept the credentials steady. The badge gleamed under the overhead lights. His photo on the identification card stared back at them with the same calm expression he wore now. He let the moment hang. Not for drama, for accountability. "You didn't ask," Michael said, voice precise. "You assumed." Hart swallowed, Adam's apple moving under his collar. "You're FBI," he managed, the words stripped of command. 15 years, Michael said. "I'm traveling on official business." Sarah finally found a breath. "I didn't know," she said, voice thin. "I was just—" Michael's eyes cut to her. The look stopped the sentence in her throat. "My badge doesn't change what you did," he said. "It only proves you were wrong out loud." A soft murmur rippled through the cabin, relief, shock, anger, then died again under the weight of the cameras. The woman filming didn't move. Her phone stayed locked on the scene, capturing Sarah's pale face, Morrison's retreat, the captain's frozen stare. Michael lowered the credentials just slightly, enough to show control, not concession. "I have a valid ticket," he said, still calm. "And I have witnesses, and I have recordings." He turned his head slowly, looking at the phones, the passengers, the tense shoulders, the tight mouths. "Every person here saw what happened," he said. "Every person here can prove it." Hart's lips parted as if he wanted to reshape the moment, to call it a misunderstanding, to rewind and re-record. But the cabin had already recorded the truth. And the truth, for once, was louder than the uniforms. The badge didn't end the conflict. It just stripped away the comfort of pretending. Captain Hart stood rigid in the aisle, eyes fixed on the open credential wallet as if it might dissolve if he stared long enough. Sarah's hands hovered near her waist, unsure whether to clasp, to hide, to reach for the authority she had relied on seconds earlier. Morrison kept a cautious distance now, shoulders drawn back, chin lowered, as though shrinking could undo what he'd threatened. Michael closed the wallet with a soft snap and held it at chest height, not as a weapon, but as a boundary. The cabin lights made the gold edge of the badge flash whenever his wrist shifted. Around him, phone screens glowed steadily, quiet witnesses that didn't blink. Hart cleared his throat. The sound was dry, nervous. "Sir, perhaps there's been a misunderstanding. If we could just—" "There's no misunderstanding," Michael said. His voice stayed even, but it carried. He didn't need volume. He had clarity. "Your flight attendant saw my skin and invented a problem. You backed it without verifying a single fact." Sarah flinched like the words had weight. "I was doing my job," she said quickly, desperate for the familiar script. "I had concerns." "Concerns don't turn a valid boarding pass into fraud," Michael cut in. "And they don't turn a quiet passenger into disruptive." Morrison shifted his jaw, the muscle jumping under his cheek. "Sir, I didn't know you were," he started. Michael's eyes slid to him, cold enough to quiet the sentence without raising his voice. "You didn't know because you didn't ask," he said. "You looked at the pass for 2 seconds. You ignored witnesses. Then you threatened to make it physical." A murmur moved through the cabin, sharp and angry. The businessman in 1A stepped a fraction farther into the aisle, as if ready to anchor the truth with his body if he had to. "I'm an attorney," he said, holding out a business card toward the front like a blade wrapped in paper. "I will provide a full statement of what I witnessed." Hart's gaze flicked to the card, then away. His uniform still looked perfect, but his control had cracks now, visible in the slight tremor at the corner of his mouth. The woman filming across the aisle didn't lower her phone. She angled it so the time and the faces stayed in frame. The recording icon pulsed like a heartbeat. "I'm uploading this the moment we land," she said. "The whole world is going to see it." Sarah's throat worked as she swallowed. Her eyes darted, not to Michael's boarding pass anymore, but to the phones. The truth wasn't just in the cabin. It was in people's pockets, ready to travel faster than any airplane. Hart tried again, voice softer now, careful. We can offer compensation, a full refund, an upgrade on future flights, whatever we need to. Michael's mouth tightened into something that wasn't a smile. I don't want a refund, he said. I want accountability. The word landed heavier than money. He turned his head slightly, letting the cabin see his profile, letting every camera catch the control in his posture. He didn't look like a man trying to win an argument. He looked like a man documenting a failure. I want policy changes, he continued. Mandatory bias training. An independent review of how many times this has happened and no one cared. Sarah's face reddened again, anger fighting panic. You can't just demand, she began. Michael's eyes returned to her, flat. How many black passengers have you questioned like this, Sarah? He asked. How many times did you have a feeling because someone didn't look like your idea of first class? Sarah opened her mouth, then closed it. Her silence answered louder than words. Hart's shoulders dipped slightly, as if the weight of the cabin had finally reached him. He looked at the phones again. He looked at the businessman's card. He looked at Michael's steady hands. For the first time, he looked like a man realizing there were consequences beyond this flight. Morrison tried to reclaim a shred of authority, voice forced. Sir, we can resolve this quietly. Let's not escalate. Michael's gaze snapped to him. You escalated when you threatened to pull me out of my seat, he said. You escalated when you threatened a passenger for recording. You escalated when you ignored multiple witnesses and chose a lie because it was convenient. The cabin stayed quiet, but the silence had changed. It wasn't fear anymore. It was attention, the kind that doesn't let people hide. Michael lowered himself back into seat 2A with controlled calm, the leather creaking softly beneath him. He placed his credential wallet back on his lap for a moment, letting it remain visible, then rested both hands on the armrests. His posture said the decision was made. This flight is leaving, he said. I'm staying in my seat. Hart's lips parted, then closed. He looked trapped between authority and reality. Michael's eyes lifted to him, steady, deliberate. If you try to remove me now, you'll be forcibly removing a federal agent who has broken no laws, Michael said. Every phone in this cabin is recording. Make your choice. A long beat. The overhead light above Michael's seat buzzed faintly. Somewhere behind the curtain, a boarding announcement echoed from the terminal, muffled and distant. Hart finally moved, not forward but back half a step, then another, like retreating from a ledge. Morrison swallowed and glanced toward the front galley. Sarah's eyes followed his. The three of them shared a brief, wordless exchange, the kind people have when they realize the story is no longer theirs to control. Hart lifted a hand toward the intercom phone near the galley, hesitated, then picked it up. His voice was tight when he spoke into it, careful and clipped. We need the gate supervisor to the aircraft. Immediately. The click of the handset returning to its cradle sounded final, like a stamp on a page. Michael didn't move. He kept his gaze forward, breathing slow, listening to the cabin's hum and the faint, nervous shifting of uniforms. The phone stayed up. Outside the open door, footsteps approached on the jet bridge, quick and purposeful. Someone was coming, and the moment was no longer about a seat. It was about what the evidence would force the airline to admit. The footsteps on the jet bridge were close enough now that the cabin could feel them, a dull rhythm vibrating through the floor like incoming weather. Captain Hart stood near the front galley with his shoulders locked, jaw tight, eyes flicking between the open aircraft door and the phones aimed down the aisle. Sarah remained planted a few paces behind him, posture stiff, as if still trying to hold the shape of authority even after it had cracked. Morrison stayed to the side, no longer looming but not leaving either, hovering like a problem that hadn't been told where to go. Michael sat in 2A with the calm of someone refusing to be moved by pressure. His credential wallet rested inside his bag again, but the weight of it was still present in the room. The leather of the seat was cool against his back. The air tasted dry, recycled, threaded with coffee and jet fuel. The cabin had become a still photograph. Every movement looked intentional because no one wanted to give the wrong moment to a camera. Hart took a breath, then stepped forward again, as if he needed to reclaim control before the gate supervisor arrived and saw too much. Sir, Hart said, voice measured and low, we can resolve this without further disruption. Michael didn't turn his head immediately. He let the words sit, then looked at Hart the way he would look at a man who had the power to make better choices, and refused. The disruption is manufactured, Michael said. Not by me. Hart's mouth tightened. His eyes darted toward Sarah, then away. You need to understand, Hart said. My crew has to maintain order. If a crew member feels... Feels what? Michael asked quietly. That I don't belong? Sarah's face flushed hard. She took half a step forward, as if the accusation offended her more than the reality. This is not about race, she snapped. It's about procedure. Michael's eyes slid to her, flat and steady. Procedure is checking a boarding pass and ending the conversation when it's valid. Sarah's jaw worked, searching for a reply that would sound reasonable on camera. She didn't find one. Her eyes flicked to the phones again. The record wasn't forgiving. Morrison cleared his throat, voice carefully neutral now. Sir, if you would just step into the jet bridge for a moment, we can verify everything with the gate. Michael's gaze cut to him, sharp enough to stop the sentence. You verified it in the cabin, Michael said. You saw the pass. You chose to escalate anyway. Morrison's lips pressed together. His shoulders shifted, uncomfortable. The easy confidence from earlier was gone, replaced by calculation. He was trying to figure out the version of events that would hurt him least. Hart looked down the aisle toward the passengers, then back at Michael. His voice tightened again, edging toward a command. If my crew member has asked you to deplane, you need to comply. That's the policy. Michael let the silence stretch for a beat. He could hear the faint buzz of an overhead light and the soft hum of the ventilation. Somewhere farther back, a carry-on wheel clicked against the aisle track. The sounds were small, but they made the moment feel real. Michael spoke with controlled precision. Policy doesn't override facts, Captain, and it doesn't override federal law. That landed differently. Hart's eyes narrowed, not in anger but in wary attention. Michael didn't reach for the overhead bin this time. He didn't move fast. He simply leaned down and pulled his laptop bag closer with 2 fingers, sliding it toward his knees until it sat in clear view, grounded. The bag thumped softly against the carpeted floor. Morrison's posture tensed reflexively. Then he caught himself. He forced his hands away from his belt, as if remembering there were cameras. Michael kept his voice even. I'm carrying classified briefing materials in that bag, he said. I fly first class for privacy. I paid for this seat because bureau policy doesn't cover premium seating, even when the work demands it. If you drag me off this aircraft, you're not just removing a passenger. You're creating a federal incident with witnesses and video evidence. Sarah's face tightened, disbelief fighting panic. You're threatening us, she said, trying to frame it. Michael's eyes didn't blink. I'm describing consequences, he said. You threatened me with physical removal. You threatened passengers for recording. You labeled me disruptive when I sat quietly. That's not a misunderstanding. That's a pattern of decisions. Hart's throat bobbed as he swallowed. The word federal hung between them like a flare. Across the aisle, the woman filming shifted her grip slightly, steadying her phone. The businessman in 1A stayed standing, shoulders squared, like he had decided the truth didn't get to be bullied back into silence. You're making this bigger than it needs to be, Hart said, voice strained. Michael's mouth curved into something close to humor, but it was dry, humorless. It was already big when you decided I didn't deserve verification, he said. A sharp, distant sound came from the jet bridge, someone's radio chirping, then footsteps quickening. Hart glanced toward the open door. The edges of his composure were fraying now. He turned back to Michael, trying one more time to reclaim control through formality. Sir, I'm instructing you to. Michael interrupted gently. Not with volume, but with certainty. I'm not leaving my seat, Captain. I have a valid ticket. I have violated no policy. Every phone in this cabin is recording. If you try to remove me, you will be doing it on camera, against witnesses, with no lawful basis beyond your crew's assumption. The cabin was silent, but it wasn't passive. It was watching with intent. Hart's gaze flicked again to the phones, then to Sarah, then to Morrison. His eyes were asking for an exit that didn't exist. Michael leaned back into the leather and placed both hands on the armrests again, palms down, relaxed. A posture that made it impossible to claim he was aggressive. Make your choice, Michael said. The words weren't a threat. They were a trap built out of evidence. Hart didn't answer immediately. He stood there, caught between the authority he wanted to project and the truth being recorded. Then, in the space where he should have spoken, the footsteps reached the aircraft door. A figure appeared at the entrance, silhouette framed by the brighter light of the terminal. Someone with purpose. Someone who had been called because the situation had already crossed the line. The gate supervisor was boarding. Patricia Green stepped onto the aircraft with the clipped stride of someone arriving to stop a fire before it reached the fuel. She was in her early 40s, hair pulled back tight, an airline badge catching the light near her collarbone. Her eyes took in the cabin in one sweep, phones raised. A captain stalled near the galley, a security officer too close to the aisle, a flight attendant standing rigid, and a man seated in 2A who looked calm in a way that made panic around him look even uglier. The air felt heavier when she walked in, as if the cabin had been holding its breath waiting for an adult. "Someone explain what happened," Patricia said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it didn't need to be. It carried the kind of authority that came from solving problems for a living, not creating them. 6 passengers started speaking at once. Words overlapped, urgent. A hand lifted a business card. Another hand lifted a phone closer, screen bright. Patricia held up one palm, flat, and the cabin quieted in a single beat, one at a time. The businessman in 1A stepped forward and offered his card again, jaw tight. "I'm an attorney. I witnessed the whole thing." He was seated quietly. The boarding pass was valid. They targeted him. Patricia took the card without looking away from the scene. Her eyes shifted to the woman filming across the aisle. "May I see that?" Patricia asked, nodding toward the phone. The woman extended it carefully, as if passing evidence in a courtroom. The screen showed a paused frame of Sarah leaning over Michael, her posture aggressive, voice sharp. The recording icon and timestamp sat at the top of the screen like a sealed label. Patricia's thumb tapped play. For 30 seconds, the cabin listened to itself. Sarah's tone, the accusation, the dismissal of the boarding pass, Morrison's threat, the way authority had piled on without a single fact being checked. The truth wasn't dramatic on video. It was worse than that. It was casual. Patricia's face went rigid, not shocked, not confused, furious in a controlled, professional way. She handed the phone back gently, then turned to Sarah. "You're done," Patricia said. "Get off this aircraft immediately and report to my office." Sarah's eyes widened, mouth opening as if a protest might save her. Her hands lifted a fraction, palms half turned outward. "But I was just trying to—" Patricia cut her off without raising her voice. "You created a federal incident in a first-class cabin in front of multiple witnesses with multiple recordings." Sarah's face drained, then flushed again, but this time the color looked like humiliation. Patricia's gaze snapped to Morrison. "And you," she said, "you're being reported to your supervisor. Leave the aircraft." Morrison's posture stiffened, instinctively trying to reclaim rank. "Ma'am, I was responding to crew." "I watched the video," Patricia said, voice like a door closing. "I heard you threaten passengers. I heard what you said. You're done here." Morrison swallowed. His eyes dropped to the carpet. He turned and started toward the door, moving fast now, as if speed could shorten the distance between him and consequences. Sarah hesitated, frozen in place, looking from Hart to Patricia, searching for someone to outrank the decision. Hart didn't move. He didn't step in. His silence was a confession. Patricia held Sarah's gaze until Sarah finally turned and walked, shoulders tense, steps quick, head down. Morrison followed behind her, no longer an enforcer, just a man leaving a scene he had failed. The cabin exhaled in small, angry breaths. Leather creaked as passengers shifted. Phones stayed up, tracking Sarah and Morrison as they passed, capturing the way their authority had evaporated. Patricia turned to Captain Hart next. "We'll discuss your role in this later," Patricia said, each word measured. "For now, I need you to get this flight to Washington." Hart's face tightened, but he nodded once, stiff and shallow, as if agreement was the only safe posture left. Then Patricia faced Michael. Her expression softened slightly, not into friendliness, but into professionalism. "Sir, on behalf of the airline, I sincerely apologize for what you experienced. This is unacceptable. There will be accountability." Michael didn't nod. He didn't accept the apology like it was a transaction. His gaze stayed steady, tired in a way that didn't show weakness. "This isn't the first time," Michael said. Patricia's eyes narrowed, attention sharpening. Michael's hand rested on the armrest. His other hand hovered near his bag, fingertips grazing the leather as if grounding himself. 3 previous flights over the last 2 years, he said. First class. Different attendants. Same questions. It never happens in economy. It never happens to white passengers. The cabin went quiet again, but now it was a different kind of silence, less shock, more recognition. A few heads turned, not toward Sarah anymore, but toward the idea that this had happened before and kept happening. Patricia's jaw tightened. She closed her eyes for a half-second, like she was seeing the pattern click into place. "How many times did you file a complaint?" she asked. Michael's voice stayed calm. "None. I let it go. I was tired. I didn't want a confrontation. Today, your employee didn't just question me. She lied about me being disruptive. She called security. She tried to have me removed. And your captain and your security officer backed her without evidence." Patricia nodded slowly, absorbing it like a report. "I understand," she said. Michael's eyes didn't soften. "I'm filing a formal complaint with the Department of Transportation," he said. "I'm filing a federal civil rights lawsuit. I'm requesting a full investigation into discriminatory practices at this airline." A faint beep sounded from somewhere near the galley, an intercom check, a system waking up. The plane felt suddenly procedural again, as if it wanted to return to normal. Patricia kept her voice steady. "You'll have full cooperation from our legal department." Michael's mouth tightened, his tone colder. "I don't want cooperation," he said. "I want systemic change." Patricia held his gaze, and for the first time, the cabin felt like it was watching someone in authority decide whether to treat this as a public relations mess or a moral failure. Michael continued, "Each demand clean and specific. I want every complaint filed by minority passengers over the last 10 years reviewed. Mandatory anti-discrimination training. Independent oversight. Financial consequences significant enough that this never gets ignored again." Patricia nodded once, more firmly now. "Understood." Michael settled back in his seat. The leather sighed. He kept his hands visible, not because anyone deserved reassurance, but because he refused to give anyone the option to rewrite the moment. Patricia stepped back toward the door, eyes tracking Sarah and Morrison disappearing down the jet bridge, then returned her attention to the cabin. "We're going to get this flight moving," she said. The phones didn't lower. Not yet. The record was still being made. The cabin didn't return to normal. It only pretended. Patricia moved with purpose near the front galley, speaking quietly into a handset, her tone clipped and controlled. Captain Hart stood beside her, listening with his head slightly bowed, hands clasped behind his back like he was trying to remember how authority was supposed to look after it had been recorded failing. Michael stayed seated in 2A. The leather beneath him had warmed from his body, but the air around him still felt cool and dry. He kept his posture composed, gaze forward, and the bag close. The phones in the cabin lowered a little, not because people forgot, but because wrists tired. Screens dimmed, then brightened again when someone tapped them awake. A faint chime sounded from somewhere deeper in the aircraft. An overhead announcement crackled and died. Outside the open door, the jet bridge hummed with distant movement, the world continuing while this cabin processed what had just happened. The woman across the aisle, still the steadiest camera, leaned slightly toward Michael without crossing into his space. Her phone was angled down now, but she kept it ready. "I got his badge in her face," she murmured, more to herself than to him, then glanced up to confirm he'd heard. The screen glow reflected on her fingertips. Michael gave a small nod. No gratitude performed for the camera, just acknowledgement. Patricia returned from the galley and paused at the edge of the aisle, eyes scanning the first-class rows like she was counting damages. She didn't speak to Michael again. Not yet. She was busy containing. A man farther back in first class, older, careful, held a notepad on his knee and wrote something down, then underlined it. The motion was small but deliberate, the way someone writes when they know details matter later. Michael's eyes flicked to the notepad and then to the phone screens. The evidence wasn't just emotional now. It was becoming organized. Across the aisle, the woman filming tilted her phone to show the businessman in 1A a frame. He leaned in, and Michael caught the corner of the screen. A close shot of Sarah's upper chest area as she leaned forward, her badge catching the cabin light. The number was sharp, 47821. The image held long enough for anyone to read it. Then the woman pinched the screen to zoom in tighter, centering the number like a target. She didn't say anything. The action said enough. A few seats away, another passenger whispered, "That's her employee number." And someone else answered, "Good. Keep that." The record was becoming names. The cabin lights made everything look sterile, but the mood wasn't. It was tense in a new way, less fear of removal, more anger at how close it had come. People had the look of witnesses, not travelers. Their bodies were still, but their attention was sharp. Michael reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. The glass was cool against his palm. He unlocked it without theatrics, thumbs steady, and opened the Notes app. He typed with concise precision. Flight number, seat, names, times. He didn't narrate it. He didn't announce it. The act of writing was enough. He glanced up and saw the woman across the aisle adjust her recording angle again, this time capturing the front galley. In the frame, Captain Hart's profile was visible, tight jaw, controlled breathing, eyes fixed on a point that wasn't a person. He looked like a man trying to convince himself he still had control. The phone's recording interface remained on screen. In the top corner, the time was visible. 7:18. The woman paused the video at the moment Morrison's voice cut in with impatience. The timestamp hovered above his threat like a label. Michael saw it and felt the ECHO land in his mind with clinical satisfaction. Not joy, not revenge. Just the knowledge that a lie couldn't float forever when it had a time printed on it. Patricia stepped into the aisle again. She spoke in a low voice to Captain Hart, and he nodded, then turned toward the cockpit without looking at the passengers. His shoes tapped softly on the aisle floor, retreating back toward the door that had separated him from responsibility earlier. Patricia then turned to the cabin, her face composed, her hands open at her sides. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, "we appreciate your patience. We're addressing an onboard issue. We will be departing shortly." Her words were smooth, but her eyes were different. They were scanning phones, scanning faces, registering how many angles existed. She knew she wasn't just speaking to passengers, she was speaking to a future audience. The businessman in 1A leaned toward her, his voice calm but unyielding. "I'll email my statement," he said, "and I'll preserve the video." Patricia nodded once, no argument. "Please do." That small exchange felt like a shift in power, a formal acknowledgement that the cabin wasn't noise, it was evidence. Michael's phone vibrated once in his hand, an incoming notification he ignored. He turned the device slightly, shielding the screen as he typed one more line. 3 prior incidents. He stopped, stared at the words, then saved the note. The metallic taste that had been in his mouth earlier was fading, replaced by something harder. Resolve. Across the aisle, the woman filming whispered again, barely audible. "The time's in it, her number's in it, everything's in it." Michael met her eyes briefly. His expression stayed controlled, but the meaning was clear. "Keep it." She nodded and locked her phone, not ending the recording permanently, just preserving the file the way a person protects something valuable. Patricia moved back toward the door, speaking quietly into her radio again. The radio chirped in response, a high, clipped sound that cut through the cabin hum. A gate announcement echoed faintly from outside, muffled by the open door. Michael looked toward the aircraft entrance. The jet bridge beyond was bright and busy, but the threshold of the door felt like a line the situation had crossed and couldn't uncross. He didn't feel victorious. He felt awake. The truth was no longer just what happened. It was what could be proven. And in a cabin filled with phones, timestamps, and a clean employee number caught on camera, the lie finally had nowhere left to hide. Patricia's patience wasn't gentle. It was surgical. She moved down the aisle with the phone still fresh in her mind, the 30 seconds that had turned a messy dispute into a clean, documented failure. Her heels made soft, controlled taps on the carpet, the kind of sound that made people straighten without being told to. When she reached Michael's row, she didn't stop to perform sympathy. She stopped to take inventory. Captain Hart was no longer beside her. He had retreated toward the cockpit, leaving Patricia to handle what he had helped create. The absence of his uniform in the aisle felt like an admission all by itself. Patricia turned slightly toward the front, then spoke without looking back, voice low but firm. "Sarah Collins, Patricia said. Now. The name cut through the cabin like a blade. For a second, nothing moved. Then Sarah appeared again at the threshold of first class. Not from courage, but because she hadn't left quickly enough. Her face was tight, jaw clenched, eyes darting between the phones and Patricia. The confidence she had worn earlier was gone. What remained was defiance, trying to survive under a spotlight. Patricia's gaze pinned her. "Get off this aircraft immediately and report to my office," Patricia said. Sarah's mouth opened, a protest forming on instinct. "I was just—" Patricia lifted one hand, palm out. The gesture stopped the sentence in place. "I watched the video," Patricia said. "You don't get to rewrite what's recorded." A few passengers shifted, the leather sighing softly. Phones rose higher again, as if the cabin understood this was the moment that would matter later, the moment where consequences became visible. Sarah's eyes flicked toward Michael. For a heartbeat, there was something bitter in them, as if she blamed him for the cameras, for the truth, for her own choices. Patricia didn't allow the glance to linger. "Move," she said. "Now." Sarah's shoulders stiffened, then she turned. Her steps down the aisle were fast, uneven. She didn't look at the passengers as she passed, but the phones followed her anyway, capturing the angle of her face, the tension in her neck, the way her hands kept opening and closing at her sides as if she didn't know where to put them. At the store, she hesitated, just long enough to suggest she wanted someone to stop her. No one did. She stepped off the plane. Patricia's eyes shifted to Morrison. He stood near the side of the aisle, trying to look neutral, trying to look like he was only ever a messenger. His posture was tighter now, shoulders raised, chin tucked. Patricia's voice was colder when she addressed him. "Officer Morrison, leave the aircraft." Morrison's lips pressed together. "Ma'am, I was responding to." Patricia's head tilted a fraction, the smallest sign of disbelief. "Responding doesn't include threatening passengers for recording," she said. "And it doesn't include ignoring witnesses when the evidence is in your hand." Morrison's gaze dropped to the carpet. His throat bobbed as he swallowed. He didn't argue again. He turned and walked quick steps, eyes fixed ahead like he was trying to outrun his own voice from the video. He followed Sarah down the jet bridge. Phones tracked him too. The cabin remained silent as they left, but the silence wasn't passive. It felt like a verdict being delivered without applause. Patricia stood in the aisle for a beat, letting the absence settle. Then she turned her head toward the front galley. "Captain Hart," Patricia called. A pause. Then Hart appeared at the edge of first class, his expression tight and controlled, like a man wearing a uniform that suddenly felt too heavy. Patricia didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. "We will discuss your role in this," Patricia said, choosing every word. "Later. Right now, you're getting this flight to Washington." Hart's jaw flexed. He nodded once, stiff. "Understood." Patricia held his gaze long enough to make sure he understood something else. The conversation wasn't over. It had simply been postponed. Hart turned and disappeared toward the cockpit again, footsteps measured, face unreadable. Patricia then faced Michael. The cabin lights caught the edges of her badge as she shifted. She took a breath, and her tone softened, but only slightly. "Sir, I apologize," she said. "This should not have happened." Michael didn't accept the apology with a smile. He looked at her the way he looked at everyone now, calm, assessing, unwilling to trade comfort for truth. "It shouldn't happen to anyone," Michael said. Patricia nodded as if she agreed, as if she already knew. She glanced toward the phones, then back to him. "We'll document everything," she said. "I'm going to need your contact information so our legal department can follow up." Michael's eyes stayed steady. "I'll provide it," he said. "But I'm not waiting on your process to begin mine." Patricia's expression tightened. Not defensive, more like she understood the weight of the statement. Michael shifted his hand toward his phone, then paused, letting the moment become clear to the cabin as well. "I'm filing a formal complaint with the Department of Transportation," he said, "and I'm filing a federal civil rights lawsuit." A subtle murmur moved through the seats. The businessman in 1A exhaled sharply, satisfied in a grim way, as if a line had finally been drawn that couldn't be erased. Patricia nodded once, slowly. "I understand," she said, "and we will cooperate fully." Michael's gaze didn't soften. "Cooperation isn't enough," he said. "I want systemic change." Patricia's lips pressed together. She glanced down the aisle at the passengers, at the phones, at the faces that had stayed when it would have been easier to look away. Michael's voice stayed calm, but his words were precise, built like a list that belonged in a report. I want every complaint filed by minority passengers over the last 10 years reviewed. Mandatory anti-discrimination training for every crew member. Independent oversight. And financial consequences significant enough that this stops being dismissed as misunderstandings. Patricia didn't interrupt. She listened, and the longer she listened, the more the cabin understood this wasn't just about one flight attendant or one security officer. It was about a system that had assumed silence would protect it. She finally nodded again. "Understood," she said. Michael leaned back into the seat, shoulders still squared, hands resting on the armrests. He looked out the window at the gray morning beyond the jet bridge, the world moving as if nothing had happened. The phones in the cabin began to lower, not because the moment was over, but because the decision had been made. The consequences were now in motion. Patricia stepped back toward the front, speaking quietly into her radio. The radio chirped in response. Somewhere deeper in the aircraft, a chime sounded procedures resuming, the machine of travel pretending it hadn't just exposed something rotten. Michael remained in seat 2A. The record had already left the cabin. The aircraft finally moved, but the story moved faster. 47 minutes late, the plane lifted into a pale morning sky and leveled out toward Washington. The cabin settled into the ordinary rituals of flight, seatbelts unclicked, bags nudged under seats, screens glowing again, yet nothing felt ordinary around seat 2A. People spoke in lower voices now, as if volume might contaminate what had just been preserved. Michael kept his tablet closed. He didn't read. He watched reflections in the window, watched the way passengers kept glancing at their phones, thumbs moving in quick, private motions, files saving, messages sent, backups made. The record was being duplicated with the quiet urgency of people who understood how quickly institutions tried to erase discomfort. When the plane touched down, the tires screamed briefly against the runway. A hard, real sound. The cabin jolted, then rolled forward, and the moment it became legal to use devices, screens lit up like a small city. Upload bars appeared, percentages climbed, captions formed. The woman who had filmed the longest didn't look at Michael when she hit send. She just pressed the screen with a steady finger and watched the progress circle complete. Then she saved another copy, and another, as if preserving it in multiple places could keep it safe from denial. Within hours, the video moved beyond the passengers who had recorded it. It found strangers. It found outrage. It found algorithms hungry for proof. By the time Michael stepped into the terminal, his phone was vibrating nonstop, notifications stacking like receipts. He ignored most of them and opened a single document, adding details with the calm efficiency of someone building a case. Flight number, names, times, employee number, witness contact information. A week later, a formal complaint went to the Department of Transportation. A federal civil rights lawsuit followed, the number written clean and blunt in the filing. 1.2 million. The figure looked cold on paper. Not dramatic. Not emotional, just consequences measured in dollars because that was the language corporations were forced to understand. The airline's response arrived in carefully shaped sentences. Regret without admission, concern without accountability. A promise of review that sounded like delay. Then the pattern surfaced. Internal complaint logs, human resources notes, emails between supervisors. A trail of dismissed reports that all sounded similar. Misunderstanding, oversensitive, no evidence, resolved. Except now, there was evidence. And it wasn't just one video. It was multiple angles, multiple devices, employee numbers visible, timestamps anchored. The same moment mirrored across phones in different hands, impossible to argue away as altered or incomplete. When the airline's legal team began to pull records, the number grew heavier with each page. 47 formal complaints over 7 years. 45 dismissed. The files weren't dramatic. They were worse, quiet, procedural, routine, a system trained to minimize and move on. Names repeating. Notes about tone. Notes about customer perception. Warnings about Sarah Collins that had been filed and then ignored because she was efficient. Michael read the summary with the same expression he wore in seat 2A, controlled, unmoved by spin. The airline moved quickly once it understood the public would not. Sarah Collins was terminated within 48 hours. No severance, no softened exit. Her name became searchable next to the video, permanently welded to the footage of her own certainty. Jake Morrison was fired from airport security. His file was pulled apart, complaint by complaint, and 6 earlier reports from minority travelers were suddenly treated like evidence instead of inconvenience. Captain Hart was suspended pending investigation and later demoted, stripped of command and reassigned to ground training duties. A career that had once looked untouchable ended in paperwork and silence, not applause. The airline attempted to stabilize itself with statements and policy drafts, but the video kept circulating, gathering viewers the way a storm gathers energy. Millions became tens of millions. The footage showed what people had felt for years, and the clarity of it made denial look stupid. The lawsuit moved with the steady pressure of inevitability. Depositions were scheduled. Requests for documents landed on desks like, "Wait." The airline's attorneys watched the videos again and again, searching for a gap they could wedge open. There wasn't one. 4 months after the filing, the airline settled. The agreement didn't come with a victory speech. It came with signatures, dates, and obligations. Mandatory anti-bias training for flight crews. Independent quarterly audits of passenger complaints. A zero-tolerance policy for racial profiling. A passenger advocacy office created because ignoring people had finally become too expensive. 23 employees with patterns of discrimination complaints were forced to resign, the system cutting loose parts of itself to survive. The settlement number 1.2 million became a headline. It traveled with the video and sharpened it, turning outrage into consequence. Michael didn't celebrate. He didn't post triumph. He read the final paperwork the way he read intelligence reports, looking for what it required, what it changed, what it prevented from being quietly undone later. Then he moved the money where it could do more than punish. He built a foundation to support victims of travel discrimination and consulted on civil rights compliance, forcing the same industry that had tried to remove him to learn the cost of assumptions. The airline used the footage in training seminars, a case study played on screens in clean conference rooms. The irony was brutal. The same system that had relied on silence now relied on the video to teach itself what it had refused to learn when people complained. The story didn't fade. It calcified. The video kept climbing. 50 million views. A number so large it stopped being a count and became a warning. And somewhere inside that warning was a smaller, quieter truth that never went viral. How many times the same thing had happened without a camera, without an employee number visible, without a timestamp pinned to the lie? That was the part Michael couldn't stop thinking about. Because this time, the record survived. And next time, someone else might not be so lucky. Years later, the video still existed everywhere. It played in sterile training rooms where the air smelled like dry markers and burnt coffee. It played on muted screens in airport break rooms, captions on, volume off, while employees ate lunch with their backs against vending machines. It played in corporate compliance seminars where people nodded at the right moments, as if recognition could substitute for change. The footage had been polished into a lesson, trimmed into slides, labeled as a case study. But it still carried the same sharpness: how quickly assumptions became orders, how easily authority protected itself, how silently a cabin could watch until a phone forced it to see. Michael Reynolds sat in another first-class seat on another morning, the kind of morning that looked harmless from the outside. The cabin lights were softer now, the leather newer, the coffee smell the same. A flight attendant moved down the aisle with a practiced smile, offering drinks, checking bins, speaking in the careful tone airlines taught after lawsuits. She didn't stop at Michael's row to challenge his right to be there. She didn't ask to see his boarding pass like it was a counterfeit bill. She didn't narrow her eyes as if his presence offended the price tag of the seat. She treated him like a passenger. It shouldn't have felt notable. It did. Michael kept his expression neutral as she paused near his seat, asked politely if he'd like anything. Her badge caught a small flare of light when she leaned forward. He noticed it anyway: numbers, letters, the habit of reading details that had once mattered too much. He declined with a small shake of his head. She moved on without tension. without suspicion, without needing to prove she was not like the last one. The aisle stayed normal. Michael placed his boarding pass on the tray table for a moment, flattening it with his palm until the paper lay perfectly smooth. Not because anyone demanded it. Because his hands remembered what paper could become when someone decided it was fake. He slid the pass into his jacket pocket, then opened his tablet. The screen lit his face with a pale glow. An encrypted document loaded. Lines of text formed, dense and quiet, the kind of work that never made headlines. Outside the window, the tarmac glistened with a thin layer of morning moisture, ground crew moving like small figures in reflective vests. The aircraft door closed with a heavy final sound. The seatbelt sign chimed. A soft ding that used to mean routine. Now it meant the start of another controlled space where people decided who belonged. Michael's phone vibrated once against his thigh. An old habit made him check it, even when there was no reason. A message sat at the top of the screen, short and plain. A stranger had written through the Foundation's contact form. "It happened to me last week." Michael stared at the sentence for a moment. No name, no details yet, just that one line, heavy as a bruise. He set the phone down and looked forward. The cabin around him was calm. People adjusted headphones. A businessman tapped at a laptop. Someone laughed softly at a private joke. The normalcy felt almost cruel. The engines spooled louder, a deepening roar that filled the floor and the bones of the seat. The plane began to push back from the gate, slow and smooth, like nothing bad ever happened in first class anymore. Michael's fingers hovered above the tablet, then he closed it instead. He opened the message again and began to type. He asked for the flight number, the seat, the time, the employee number if they could remember it, whether anyone recorded, whether anyone spoke up. He asked for facts the way he always did now because facts were the only thing systems respected when they were cornered. He hit send. The cabin moved through its scripted, calm safety checks, polite smiles, the faint clatter of cups, but Michael's attention stayed on the quiet mechanisms underneath. How quickly stories got erased when people were tired, when they wanted the flight to leave, when they told themselves it wasn't their problem. Outside, the plane turned toward the runway. Michael pulled his laptop bag closer with his foot, a small, unconscious gesture. The leather brushed his shoe. Familiar weight, familiar responsibility. The bag wasn't a symbol anymore. It was just what he carried: work, history, proof. The aircraft accelerated. For a few seconds, everyone leaned back into their seats at the same time, bodies pressed into leather by physics that didn't care about status. The wheels left the ground. The city fell away beneath the clouds. Michael watched the cabin settle into the quiet after takeoff, the moment where people pretended they were safe because the plane was in the air. He looked down at his phone again. The stranger's message sat there like a new file waiting to be opened. He didn't feel triumphant. He didn't feel healed. He felt responsible. He slid the phone into his pocket, breathed in the stale cabin air, and let the hum of the engine steady his thoughts. The seat beside him stayed empty. The aisle stayed calm. The world looked normal. But Michael's eyes remained alert, not searching for trouble, only refusing to ignore it. First class stayed quiet. The record didn't.